Welcome back to Emirates 24/7. Now, before the break, we were discussing the opportunities and the challenges that the Arab Spring has brought to oil players. And now we turn our attention to the impact of shale oil and gas, some products that may be an industry game changers. Well, joining us once more, Crescent Petroleum's Majid Jafar and Mana Energy Consulting's Robin Mills. Thank you for staying with us. Now, I want to ask you, particularly about shale oil and shale gas over in the US. There's been some huge estimates, shale oil in particular. I think there's been some experts saying it could be around 2 trillion barrels. This could potentially be a negative thing for the industry. We've heard from some officials. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree? Is it taking away from the Gulf oil petrochemical booming industry? And to begin with, how is sort of the shale products, how are they different to our more typical oil and gas?
Well, it's actually the same oil and gas. It's just these reserves are trapped in tight rock that previously we didn't think we could produce oil and gas from. But recently the combination of horizontal drilling and what's called fracking, which is injecting water and chemicals to open up the rock, has made this oil and gas producible. And in the US in particular, it has been a game changer already. It's actually driving a lot of the economic recovery there and making petrochemicals competitive. Natural gas prices are down there to Middle East levels. And in addition, there's an increase in efficiency. So that combination means that US oil consumption is not going to grow as much because or imports, I should say, because their production is growing. And that does impact on the region, although the big growth in demand for oil and gas from the region is actually coming more from the developing world, from China and India. The big threat we have in the region, more than the lack of demand from the US, is our own consumption. We need to be able to control our demand better. The efficiency initiatives that we have here in the UAE are an example, education, but above all attacking the subsidies. If we don't raise the price of the end product, which is electricity in some cases, we're not going to get control over our demand, because we have some of the highest energy inefficiencies in the world in this region at the moment.
I mean, obviously subsidies are a huge point of contention. It's something that we've discussed time and time again, and it's interesting because it comes at a time when we've seen FNC members actually say that subsidies should be increased, it should be cheaper for gas here, and yet many experts in the field, people like you, are saying the opposite. Robin, what are your thoughts? Subsidies, the way of the future or the end?
Well, I think when you look at just how inefficiently energy is used in the Middle East, you have to say these subsidies are really a big negative thing for the economy. You know, you can only spend $1 once, right? And you can spend it on having cheap fuel, or you can spend it on investing in education and in health and in infrastructure and all these other things. So, you know, it's very nice to think you can fill up your car cheaply, but it's kind of fooling yourself when you think that money could be spent better elsewhere. And we're talking about the shale oil, shale gas resources. You know, shale gas is a great resource for the Middle East, and we see several countries in the Middle East that have gas shortages. But unless we get prices to more realistic levels to make it actually economically attractive to produce shale gas, then we won't get access to that benefit here, and countries such as the US will be the ones to benefit.
I agree with that, and in particular on the whole issue of climate change. It's interesting when we compare Germany in Europe driving renewables targets and actually has growing carbon emissions, whereas the US, without Kyoto targets, but because of the shale gas revolution, switching from coal to gas, is now the lowest carbon emissions since 1992 in over 20 years. So actually the shift from coal to gas worldwide is actually where the biggest benefits are, and the possible positive impact on climate change as well.
So why do you think there's been a hesitation here? Obviously subsidies keep a lot of the population happy, but if they're not sustainable long term, why are we still doing them? Well, I think
subsidies, you know, it's not that you have to remove them. You can target them to those in need, to nationals, to a certain quantum per month, for example, if it's electricity or petrol rations or things like that, without necessarily wasting government budgets and in a sense harming the economic development, as Robin says, by having it all-encompassing.
Absolutely. Now, there's been some other interesting stories, both in Africa in terms of a shale oil discovery there, in Australia, but also in Africa as well. East Africa in particular, we were speaking to Somaliland's recent energy minister. He had some very impressive figures when it came to their natural gas reserves. What kind of potential does that part of the world have right now, Robin?
Well, you know, it's funny because I was on a part of a study about 10 years ago on East Africa, and everybody was thinking, you know, why are you looking at East Africa? There's no oil or gas in East Africa. And now we've seen that, yeah, there's a huge boom there. And of course, you mentioned Somaliland, but we've seen giant gas discoveries in Mozambique and Tanzania. Kenya has found oil. So all these places that were written off, now suddenly it's a real boom and everybody is trying to get in there. And I think this just shows, you know, when oil prices are high and the explorers and the private sector companies get out there and look hard, there's a huge amount of resources to be found with a little bit of imagination and a bit of new technology. And it's really, you know, it kind of shifts the energy landscape because you've now got a big new emerging gas region, and that gas from East Africa can very easily get to India, it can very easily get to Southeast Asia, it can come to the Middle East maybe. So it does change the landscape quite a bit.
What are your thoughts, Majid? We're almost out of time, but will Africa become a big priority for Crescent in the years ahead?
Well, we currently do cover North Africa as part of the MENA region, but overall I agree with Robin on the power of the private sector, in particular smaller regional players, to change the energy environment. Of course, the recent horrific attack in Algeria has raised security concerns, and that is something the industry has to deal with as well.
How do you try and tackle those security concerns?
Well, on the one level, of course, there's the obvious, you know, security precautions and protections. But I think a key is to work with the local communities, engage with them early, make sure you're addressing local needs over the long term, not just CSR, but actually making sure that your projects are meeting the local economic needs, which is our priority. I mean, we put the priority as regional companies, Crescent, Danagas, on local needs first before export.
Absolutely, I hope we do see that happen. Robin, final question. Obviously a number of new players coming into the market. How will that affect policy and consumers long term? Will OPEC become less of the major dominant force that it has been?
I think it's a challenge for the Middle East countries. I mean, I think we shouldn't say these new resources are a negative for the region. I think they're also an opportunity, but they're only an opportunity if the companies and the governments in the region think about it the right way and think about the policies that were appropriate for the 1970s and 80s. You know, maybe some of those need a bit of a rethink. I think if they do that and they embrace some of these new resources, they can be a positive for consumers and they can be a positive for the governments and for employment in this region.
Certainly, time to invest, time to reform. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate you making time for us.